Hello, everyone. We are live on our new platform, Hopin. So welcome. This is really fun for us to be on this new platform. And we have an amazing expert entrepreneur guest here today, as you can see. So yes, welcome to another Powerhouse webinar with City Moguls with our very special guest today, Ron White. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Danny Hagan.
And I'm Victoria Marshman, and we are the co-founders of City Moguls, a platform that celebrates, educates, and connects great entrepreneurs. And I'm sorry in advance, there are people blowing leaves outside my door, and I have no control, so apologies if there's background noise.
We're going to do our best today. This is the work from home COVID life. So hope you're enjoying your time at home, guys. Welcome again. Today's webinar is powered by our exclusive bank partner, CIBC. Thrilled to have them as our partner. We want to welcome our Mogul members. Hit us up in the chat if you are a member. Say hi. Who are accessing today's webinar for free as a part of their annual membership. If you want to learn more, you can always head to citymoguls.com, or you can even book a call with me or Victoria and learn how all of it works. If this is your first City Moguls event, welcome to our fabulous community. Bear with us, a little bit of a learning curve with our new platform today, so hopefully everything goes smoothly. So far, so good, I think. Please feel free to use the chat function throughout the talk. So even if Ron's chatting about something or we are asking some questions, throw in a comment, throw in a question. We will ask any question, or we will answer any question on your behalf. Hopefully Ron can answer everything. He has a plethora of knowledge, so he definitely can. This is definitely a safe, respectful, comfortable space. It's also not like a pitch place, so make sure that you're coming with questions that are relevant to today's topic. And I'm just going to pass it off to Vic now to introduce the man of the hour.
All right, awesome. So Ron, we're so super thrilled to have you. We know you don't need an introduction, but let me do my spiel anyways, just to give our guests all of the incredible things about you and what you've accomplished throughout your work. So Ron White brings sophistication and elegance to the world of designer shoes by incorporating his striking designs, luxurious materials, and unique technology in all his famous Ron White collections. As CEO and creative director, Ron became famous for re-engineering footwear and creating the world's first all-day heels. Now Ron's all-day heels technology is found in all of his collections, with styles ranging from jeans to tuxedos for both him and her. A loyal celebrity following includes ladies like Celine Dion, Kim Cattrall, and Katie Couric, and leading men Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Rob Lowe, and Matt Damon. The media have called Ron the Shuru, I love that, and regularly feature him as a fashion expert in both Canadian and international media. Ron White was named Independent Retailer of the Year by Condé Nast in 2011, which is a Canadian first, and was inducted into the Sheridan College of Business Hall of Fame in 2007. Ron and his team are also dedicated to charitable initiatives, which we love, and that's why we're so excited to have you here, which include an annual breast cancer fundraiser running strong since 1996, and Canada's largest shoe drive, which launched in 1995. And he also has the White Night Gala, which has raised over $1 million for local charities. So amazing.
Ooh. So impressive. So grateful to have you here. Let's jump right in. You've been in the game for, thank you so much for being here. You've been in the game for a while, Ron, but you kind of, I remember you telling me earlier today, you know, about 14 years ago, you started your own collection. But prior to that, you started as a retailer. So how did, like, you kind of did it almost like opposite, right? Like how come you took that route?
Well, I grew up in Winnipeg, and I moved out to Oakville, so just outside of Toronto, to go to school to Sheridan College, yay Sheridan. And I took fashion mixed with business. It was a unique mixture, half a day of one and half a day of the other, that they ran at that time. And also Sheridan was known for where Brian Bailey and Lita Bidet and Wayne Clark and other sort of people a generation ahead of me had graduated from. So that was the spot to go at the time. So I was happy to go there. And when I graduated, the mindset was to get some work experience under my belt, and move to New York and take over Saks Fifth Avenue. Like, that was the mindset back then. What ended up happening is I ended up opening up my own first store. So I used a Visa cash advance. I was living in a basement apartment and a couple small loans from some family and friends. And I opened up my first store. My first store was a multi-brand store. And so I carried about 25 different brands. And so I was a retailer that carried footwear. And it was only about a decade or even a little longer after that, getting really my feet wet in the industry and understanding the business, that I felt I couldn't find as a buyer, when you go to buy product, the right shoes that I thought my woman and my lady and my guy would want. So I started to hunt around because, the world was my oyster. And I thought, I could do this. Why don't I start going to Italy, which is where I wanted to get the shoes made, and work on that. And that sort of was the impetus to get me going to do my own thing. On the side, I had been working with some comfort brands like Mephisto, or fashion brands like Stuart Weitzman, and I would go into their showrooms. Like, I remember being with Stuart Weitzman in his showroom in New York. He's now retired, but this goes back a while. But I remember working with him and as a buyer, wanting to buy some of the shoes and asking if he could change the sole to make it more flexible, if he could flare the base of the heel to make it more stable, if he could add extra padding inside because it would be more comfortable. And he would kind of roll his eyes at me and say, yeah, we could do that. And I would kind of get the shoes made that way, and they'd be unique in my own store. And then people were like, well, why are your Stuart Weitzman shoes so much more comfortable than the other stores? And that's because I tweaked them, or I evolved them. And after doing that for a number of seasons, sort of my advisors gave me the push to, why don't you go and try and do your own thing instead of tweaking or evolving or changing someone else's? And that's sort of how it started.
That's like the true entrepreneurial story. Like, why do something for other people and help them when you can just do it yourself? Why shoes? Why shoes, Ron? Like, what was the pull there?
It was not intentional. So a lot of things just happened. I was a clothing guy. I was gonna, as I say, move to New York and be in clothing. I loved clothing. I love fashion, love design. And when I first graduated, for those who are a little older like myself, you might remember a store chain across Canada called Breton's. And Breton's was, at the time, a national chain of sort of luxury department stores, positioned probably like a notch below a Holt Renfrew, kind of where a Nordstrom would sit. And it was the ultimate place to work at the time. They had the best training program, and they had the best setup for management training and new recruits. So I was lucky enough to get hired there. And part of their criteria was you had to spend your first year in the shoe area, because shoes are the most difficult in fashion to fit. There's the most sizes, the most widths. There's the differences of last, which means like the height or the pitch that the foot sits on for a woman's shoe, for example. And it's the most difficult. So they were like, go in there and see, like, scrap it out, see what you can learn, see what you can figure out. And then from there, you could evolve into other areas in the company. And I did that because I had to. Quite frankly, I was forced to do it, but I never left. I fell in love with it, and then that's how I got into footwear. So it wasn't by choice initially. It was I learned to love it.
It's nice to hear that, though, because I think people have this idea that they're supposed to know exactly what they want to do, and sometimes you just fall into it. So it's nice to hear that, for sure. So let's talk business a little bit. How did you get from like the idea to a business? Like, I'm sure there were some obstacles along the way at the beginning, which I'd love to hear about as well, because, everyone goes through kind of the same, issues at the beginning. But what were those obstacles, and, how did you make it into an actual full-fledged business?
So if I go back to when I opened that first store, I had a couple years work experience. I had my Sheridan College degree in fashion and in merchandising. So I had some skill sets, I guess you could say, and some knowledge. But I would say the first year and the second year, and I think even the third year, every February, I thought I was going to go bankrupt. So I did not understand cash flow management at that time. So it got really cold. There was lots of snow, and people were just, okay, I'm not shopping. I have what I needed for winter, and I'm not ready for spring, and they just stopped shopping. And you had to, but as a business, as a retailer at the time, you still have to pay the rent, you still have to pay the salaries, you still have to pay all the heat, the lights, the marketing, all those expenses. So I remember sleeping in the basement of the store. I would be there all day to help clients and customers, and then I would close, grab a bite to eat, and then I would do the books and do the accounting. And then sometimes I would just crash and sleep in the basement of that street front store on Yonge Street, just north of Eglinton, and get up the next day and do it all over again. So that was a very difficult time. I don't have family that come from the shoe business or the retail business or the fashion business or the design business. So I was really just learning it as I went. But it was just when I think back then, it was almost like I didn't want to allow myself, or wouldn't allow myself to fail, because I was so worried about the embarrassment of it all. I had a lot of friends who had gone to law school and medicine, and I had graduated a couple years before them because my courses were college and it was quicker. And so I kind of was like, oh, you only went to college. I'm like, okay, well, all right, I guess I only went to college. That's what I chose to do. But I kind of felt like I couldn't allow myself to fail. Like there was no chance I was going to fail, because like that would just be so embarrassing to my friends, my family, etc. So you find a way, you tough it out, and I did, and here we are 27 years later.
So crazy. Quarter of a century. That's amazing. Okay,
I know. I got to go.
It's in style. You're good. I have a question for you, Ron, because I'm just thinking about where business was and where we are now. Like, what are some big changes that you've had to bring your brand through over the last even 25 years? I know this year's been crazy, but even over the past 25 years, retail fashion has changed so much.
Yeah, it's been a huge evolution. So my background and my passion was fashion, and it still is, of course. I did a 2-year work stint where I worked in an orthopedic shoe store. They made me a great offer, and I took it as great experience. Well, I took it because they made me a great offer, and then I bought a car the next day. But that's what you do when you're early 20s. But quite frankly, it taught me. In that store, they actually did foot assessment and gait analysis, and they sold walking shoes that were comfortable for your feet and good for your knees and your hips and your back. And they had someone making orthotics, which I learned how to do. Didn't like any of that stuff. No interest. It was just like, this was the job. I was doing it because it was the job, but I learned it all. So then when I finally sort of had the guts to do my own thing at 23, I took those ideas of what makes things comfortable in footwear, because your footwear, shoes are the basis, like they're the foundation of your body, right? So if they're not stable, if they're not made properly, it affects everything: your arches, your ankles, your knees, your hips, your back, the whole shebang. So I took that knowledge and I combined it with this passion I have for fashion. And then I rolled in, like, what are people asking for? Because I had worked in this other store, and I now had my own, and I started doing that. Again, it was over a decade of listening and learning. And what did she want? And that's how the All Day Heal came to be, because I had a lot of corporate women. I had a real estate clientele of ladies who were always in a power suit. I had lawyers. I had executives. At one point in time, I remember sitting back thinking, gosh, in 1 week we had the CEO of Home Depot, who was a woman at the time, come in and buy like 5 or 6 pairs of shoes for me. And then it was the CEO of FedEx, who was a woman, and it was our first lady at the time. And all these women, these power women, were coming in, and they were like, I want a great pump and run around all day. And then I go to a cocktail party in the evening, obviously pre-COVID. And I need to be comfortable, and I want to look good. So that's what inspired me to make the All Day Heal. So the All Day Heal was taking this sort of technology and this approach from the orthopedic world and combining it with the fashion, and then having it made. I mean, having it made was a whole other process, because you have to go to Italy, right? You go to the best factories in the world. Well, again, how does some 27-year-old kid at the time go to Italy and start finding factories? So I found my way through networking and through trade shows to a program that the U.S. government partnered with the Italian government and the consulates to bring people in the footwear business to Italy to introduce them to factories. And I kind of was like, hey, I'm Canadian. Can I come too? We're really nice. And I somehow was able to get my way included. So I had to get to New York, and then I got to jump on a plane with them. There's a whole group of people. And this was around 2000. And I went over to Italy, and they introduced me and our group to the factory that makes, Christian Louboutin, the factory that makes Manolo Blahnik, the factories that make Jimmy Choo, all these leading factories. And so I met the factory owners, and I was collecting business cards like a madman, and they all thought I was someone's son that was there on the tour. And I'm like, no, I'm doing my own thing. And that's how I got those relationships going and started to say, hey, here's my design idea. Can we make this possible? And initially, of course, they were like, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. There's no way. And so we had to reinvent constructions of shoes. So there were 7 different things I changed about a woman's pump. And then that's why I was able to get it trademarked and registered as inventing the world's first all-day heel. And it made it more comfortable, of course. And then as the collection expanded, I took that same approach for constructing the shoe and used it for my sneakers, and used it for the sandals, and used it for the evening shoes, and used it for the boots. And that's how the whole brand came together.
It's so interesting because you kind of just you do what a lot of entrepreneurs do, and you kind of just get out there and make it work and find people to help you. So you took that first step, you went to Italy, you found some factories to help you out. And then what does the rest of your supply chain look like? And how does it look different now than it did back then?
Oh my God, it's completely different. Okay. So the supply chain is the biggest headache of the business, at least for me. So you would think that designing a beautiful collection that a consumer would want would be the most important thing. It's important. You would think, and I thought for many years, that getting an appointment with the buyers of a Nordstrom, of an Neiman Marcus, of a Holt Renfrew, or whatever market you're going after would be one of the hardest things. And it is, because they probably get 1,000 people a season who approach them. And their answer is, well, I got 1,000 people who want to see me. I have 10 appointments available. Why are you one of the top 10 that I should even book an appointment with, right? So booking the appointment is sometimes as hard as anything. But the logistics, the importing, the 7 different companies that actually work for us to get a shoe that is completely made in a factory in Italy to a store, let's say in Atlanta or wherever in the US and Canada, there's actually 7 different handlers along the way. And that logistics is just wild. Like, had no clue, had no idea. Most people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you actually make the shoe in a factory, and then a freight forwarder actually picks it up and takes it to the border. And then another company puts it on a plane or a boat. And then another company meets it at the border if it's landing in the US or Canada. It's called a broker. And then the broker gets it through customs. And then another company, just for the sake of having another one, is a shipping company that takes it to your warehouse, wherever you've got a warehouse. So we have a rented warehouse that we lease in the US, and we also have one in Canada. And they actually break apart the shipment because maybe there's 2,000 pairs of shoes, and some are supposed to go to a store in Los Angeles, and some are supposed to go somewhere in Texas, and some are supposed to go somewhere in Charleston. So they break it apart, repackage it, and then another company, which in that case is FedEx, will then deliver it to those individual stores. And so if any one of those companies is late by a day, if any one of those companies has a paperwork issue, if anyone has a barcode that's wrong, if anyone has a packing list on the side of a box that got smushed or ripped or torn or can't be seen, the whole thing stops. And it's just like, it's chaos. So logistics is wild. And I believe one of the hardest parts of the business, which is really kind of crazy when you think about it. It shouldn't be, but it is.
It's so interesting because also, you would think supply chain has kind of decreased the amount of steps, but it sounds like that's always going to be the way it kind of is, whether you're an e-commerce business, a retailer, wholesaler, whatever.
Well, and also like that's from a finished product I just explained to getting it to a retail store. So our wholesale business. So I designed the collection, I have it made, and then when it's finished is what I just explained, to get it to a store. Then our retail partners who buy the collection from us, there's about 80 to 100 stores across North America now that carry my collection, and they then receive that collection into their warehouses or their sales floors or their stock rooms. And if they're brick and mortar, then they sell it through their store. And if they're online, they sell it online. I haven't even talked about, before you get there to finished product, we actually have 12 different factories that work for us in Italy. So in old-fashioned craftsmanship type approach, which is how our shoes are made, there's one factory that just makes our flats and ballerinas. That's all they do. That's all they've done for 6 generations. That's all they want to do. We have another one who does our luxury ultralight sneakers. That's all they do, is they make ultralight sneakers out of butter soft glove leather. That's it. We have another one that makes espadrilles, another one that makes sandals, another one that makes boots, another one that makes pumps. And then there's the men's collection. So they are all very specialized. So it is sort of a bit of a cottage industry and old fashioned. So we do have a small team out of our office in Florence that actually then monitor and check in with all these factories. Are you having an issue? Because I maybe have bought the suede or the leather from a tannery to make a shoe, but I also using that same, let's say that same cognac suede, take it as an example. I have it in my ballerina and I have it in my pump and I have it in my boot. Well, that's 3 different factories that have to have that same cognac suede. So I buy it from the factory because the same color has to be on all items, because eventually they sit together as a collection on the sales floor or on the website. Does that make sense? So
yeah, I feel like everyone's probably like looking down at their shoes right now, being like, wow, so much has probably gone into like my shoe, and especially if it's a Ron White shoe. So there you go. And listen, it's and yeah, and you've done a great job of breaking into the US market and thriving there. How did you do that, and why is it so important to get into the US, especially now?
Probably a hard truth for most Canadian fashion brands is, and was heady for me to understand and learn, is there's not enough business in Canada in most market segments to be a profitable business with just the Canadian market. Like, to digest that for a second, like I would have never guessed that. Like if you're a brand and here we were selling Hudson's Bay, selling the collection to Holt Renfrew, selling to leading independent stores across the country, and we were barely to break even because of all this overhead and all these expenses. So for us, having our own stores, super important in order to make a business out of it. And the word business means you're supposed to have a profit, right? It's not a charity, it's a business, right? So how do you make that profit? In our case, growing into the US was hugely impactful to get the volume up to be able to make it a business. The way it started was some of these independent stores. So like there's a great store at the time in San Francisco that had approached me because some of their top clients had been in Toronto for the film festival, had been in Toronto for different events or visiting family and friends, and purchased some shoes from one of our stores. And they went back home and wore them into this shop in San Francisco. And the people at the store were like, well, what are these shoes? Why aren't you wearing stuff from us? I thought you got all over your shoes from us. And this kept happening over and over around the US. And the customers, the clients were saying, oh, I bought these in Toronto. There's some guy named Ron White, and they're my favorite shoes. Like, they're just unbelievably comfortable. I love them. You should look into it. I would buy them from you if you had them. So I started getting phone calls from American stores saying, hey, can we buy your collection? So that's how that started. And then I started to show it in New York and started to grow with different accounts accounts means stores across the US. But hugely impactful. And it was a way to drive the volume to make it a profitable business, to make a go of it.
Ron, I'm curious, like, US is one market, and apologies if I'm delayed. I know the last question I asked, I was delayed. I'm curious what advice you have for people that are trying to grow globally, like out of North America. Like, what markets have you been able to get into, and how have you been able to do that?
So I actually have a launch planned for the UK. Which is exciting. And it was actually supposed to happen right this season, and it got put on hold because of COVID. But I actually investigated and dug into, again, government programs, because you'd be surprised how much there is out there. So there's Fashion Group International, which I'm sure many of your listeners and you both are, I'm sure, familiar with. There's different programs. So I actually went to London, England, and was part of Fashion Week there with a group of Canadians who were able to come together as a group with Fashion Group and show your collection in front of buyers and store owners and heads of fashion groups from all over Europe, but primarily in the UK. So there are some really amazing government programs that can help you expand outside of Canada. And they're specifically for that. So sometimes what I learned, and maybe some of our listeners may not know this, is when you see an election, when leaders make promises, we're going to fund this and we're going to pay for that, we're going to help this and we're going to support that. 99% of it, from my experience, comes with a government program that's usually not very well marketed. So you have to go dig for it online and find it. But they put money aside. They often don't spend that money. They make a promise, they put the money aside, but you actually have to apply for it, apply for the programs. But then they will help support you, for example, to go outside of Canada, whether it be in the US or whether it be throughout Europe or Asia or any other market. And it's usually through the EDC and Export Canada. So their mandate is to help, their goal, their job description as an organization is to help Canadian businesses expand outside of Canada. So they have all kinds of tools, they have grants, they have educational programs, and that has really been a great way to something to tap into.
There's tons out there, and you're right, they definitely are hard to find, for sure. It's not easy. So like the government grant funding route is one route. Have you ever worked with investors before, or has that been something you've brought into your business? And how do you suggest to people to get into that world, or how has it worked with you and your business?
So yes, we have two companies, but we're sort of set up in three different arms or three different channels of operating. So we have our retail business, which is from when I opened that first store 27 years ago, and we still have our brick and mortar stores in Toronto and our website. So we've got 5 of those, and that was started back then, grew organically, and is one business. And then about 14 years ago is when I started my collection, and originally it was just for the stores. Right. And it was only once these Americans and other people started asking me, could they buy the collection, that I really opened up a wholesale company. So separate company number 2. And company number 2 started to grow, and there's more reach with that. Right. I've got 5 stores in Toronto, but all of a sudden, the world's your oyster. Any store is your oyster, I guess you could go after for business. And as that started to grow, about 5 years ago, I did a round of investor investment into the company. And the way I approached it was with sort of the angel investor mentality. So I had been funding it on my own and still am primarily, but I needed something to take us to the next level, because there are a lot of overhead and expenses to get a business going, as many of you would know. But typically in our business, you've got to design a collection, and 6 months later you show the collection, and 6 months after that is when you ship the collection and actually get paid for it. So it's a year lead time that you have to fund. And that means all the expenses of the business, all the salaries, the rents, everything that's involved with that. So I did go to, I got some great advice from an old friend who's very successful, who said, you should go to people that you think would like to help you, that are supportive of businesses or entrepreneurs, and usually they're in business or entrepreneurs themselves. So that's usually the people who like to give back or are just interested. They get turned on by it, right? So they're risk takers. And the other advice was, go to people who, whatever you're asking them for, if it was $20,000 a person or $100,000 a person, and you're trying to put together a group to raise $500,000 or $1 million or whatever it is you're going to raise, go to people that you believe could lose that money and not lose a wink of sleep overnight. And that was a really, really good point. So I wasn't going to go to someone who I thought might have $100,000 to invest. I was going to people who I thought, well, my criteria was, do they have a private jet? If they have a private jet, they're probably, should be on my list, right?
There's $100,000, yeah.
Yeah. If you look it up, to fly to Europe on a private jet, it's about $45,000 in gas alone. Okay, so I'm like, if they could fly to Europe and back all the time on their private jet, they could probably, come to the table with $100,000. So that's what I did. I made a list. I started asking around. I started networking. Some were referrals, and that's how I put together an investor group.
Very cool. We have someone sent in a question, one of our members who will be watching this later today. And she asked, what's your relationship with the consumer? How does it inspire your work and designs and drive? Are consumers the source of your drive?
So yes, Yes and yes. So because this is interesting. So every other footwear designer I've ever met, which is usually at a convention or at a trade show or in Italy, um, they'll go into their studio, they'll go into their happy place, they'll go sit under a tree and stare at the sky, they'll get inspired by cloud formations, they'll see a butterfly and all of a sudden you see butterflies all over their shoes for that season, like things like that. That's how it happens, right? And because I started as a retailer, I think reverse. So the retailer is buying stuff from brands or from designers that they would sell in their stores. And they think of what the consumer would want. And unfortunately, most of the designers that I've met in footwear do not think about what the consumer wants. They think about what inspires them. And my brain is just programmed. I'm like, what does she want? And like right now, she wants slippers. She wants sneakers. She wants luxe casuals. She wants great boots that she can walk her dog and go to the grocery store and sit on a patio. Like what does she want right now? She doesn't want evening shoes. She doesn't want heels. She's not going to a cocktail party. She's not on a red carpet. She's not wearing heels around the house in most cases. So you have to think, what does she want? And then you have to steer your collection that way. So that's why I start. And then I go to phase 2, which is, what's inspired me. But what I've learned is inspiration doesn't just get turned on and off. So when I see something, I remember being at a car show, a vintage cars. I didn't even want to be there. I was there with as a tag along. I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'll come with you. And then we'll go for lunch. And I saw some gull wing convertible or Mercedes or something, but it had this beautiful leather seats that were contrasting colors within how they were stitched. And they were red and they were white and they had beautiful stitching. And I just snapped a picture with my phone and I used that stitching pattern on an espadrille later that season, in the next collection. And I remember touring, in Italy, they want to tour you around every palace and everything. I remember seeing some crazy wallpaper in a dining room that had embroidery on silk. And I snapped a picture and I used that same kind of embroidery into an evening pump, which became a huge success for us. So I kind of just grab it whenever I can, and then I just sort of keep a little file, and then I come back to that, and then you take things, you adapt them, they inspire you with a thought process or a feeling.
I love how you focus on the actual person who's buying the shoes, your customer as the source of inspiration for what you're building. I feel like a lot of shoes can look a lot the same between different brands because they're just going off of what's trending. So love that. So shifting to the marketing side of what you guys have been able to build with all of your brands, what are some things you guys have been doing this past year with COVID and everything through your marketing, and how have you guys adapted and shifted your marketing strategy through this time?
So I mentioned earlier, we sort of have 3 divisions. They're not really divisions, and I typically would say channels, but I don't want to say channels because one of them is about a bunch of channels. So sort of 3 ways that we sell product. We have our own brick and mortar stores and our website in Toronto. So there's 5 of those, and then we sell wholesale, which means we sell the collection to other retailers. So there's about 80 to 100 of those across North America, and then we have another sort of arm of the business, which is selling through television networks, such as the Shopping Channel in Canada, such as Shop HQ, which is our partner in the US. It's sort of like a boutique version of a QVC or an HSN. And what's happened when you talk about what's changed, so those sort of all 3 were firing at the same time. When COVID hit, our own retail stores would just boom, virtually collapsed. Well, first of all, they were closed, so it was gonzo. People are like, oh, so how much? What kind of drop in sales? Was it 30%, 40%? I'm like, it's 100%. They're closed. There's nothing going on. But we're still paying the rent. Okay, so so that was crazy, crazy town crazy this year. And I had a lot of friends who are just retailers that were closing and never to reopen. And I understood why. We were lucky enough to be diversified with these sort of 3 different channels. So our wholesale channel, interestingly enough, in Canada, our experience has been, and what we've seen is the retailers in Canada were hurt worse than the US, which a lot of people don't talk about. I haven't seen many articles about this yet, but they're down 45, 55%. in sales. And if you have a 20% drop, you're probably not even able to break even as a retailer. So they're down like in the toilet. And that's what's happening with the wholesale channel. But in the US, they were only down 20, 22, 24%. Now, the US is a little different. There's a lot of people running around going, I don't need a mask and I don't need this and I'm going to keep doing my life. And so they conduct themselves differently. The other thing in the US is there's a much greater population that have been shopping online for years, for over a decade, whereas Canada is just kind of figuring out online. You know, if you look at the stats, the amount of percentage of purchases online, Canada is way behind most of the world. Like Italy's way ahead, Germany's way ahead, the UK and the US are way, way, way ahead. But my belief for that is those countries had built a catalog business, this kind of mindset of ordering from a catalog on a weekly basis, which Canadians kind of didn't do. So when online happened, I think a lot of the catalog consumer went online and it was instant business, and then they attracted a lot more. So people were used to shopping that way. But the US wholesale channels or US wholesale distribution for us maintained stronger. So we started to divert product from Canada to the US to help offset the slowdown that we saw happening in Canada. But the huge winner, and by the way, I just saw an article in Women's Wear Daily just today, come out about the mother company that owns QVC and HSN, which, for those who don't know, that group of networks, of television networks in the US that sell products, are now the third largest retailer. It goes Amazon, then Walmart, then the QVC group. So that type of retail, because they're selling to the consumer, that's still retail, but it's through television, was exploding during lockdown and has only continued to grow. So for us, they were under bought. They did not have enough product. So they were like, hey, Ron, do you have more? We want to do another show. This is going fantastic. Can you get us more? And I need 6 months to make more. So what happened is we diverted stuff from the slowdown in Canada or the slowdown in our own stores or the slowdown in other stores in the US and just diverted that product from our main warehouse to those channels. And then they were like, thankful because they needed it and it was helpful for us. So for us, it was that balancing act and being diversified. And again, there was no master plan and I had no crystal ball and I didn't plan this and I didn't foresee it. And no. It just, I really feel lucky enough that we had sort of 3 different channels of distribution and we were able just to move things over to the one that was still burning and churning along. And the people who were just in one, I think, is the people that you've seen get the most hurt.
Yeah, and I want to get into some questions about e-commerce in a second. Monique Burke from our live studio audience has a question. How did you manage not to give up after hearing no, which is such a great question. Thanks, Monique.
Jesus, let me tell you how many no's. Like, whoa, what is no? No, you have to say in your mind, no means no, not yet. So when you hear no, then just someone says no, but here, no, not yet. Not just yet. Like wow, it's really hard as a brand because again, you all start from nothing and then you're the brand new one. If you're the brand new one on the scene, how do you get an appointment with a buyer of a store that you want to sell your product to? And it doesn't matter what level of store. They, again, as I mentioned earlier, they have hundreds, if not thousands of people who contact them to buy product. So what are you going to do to get that appointment? Like getting the appointment is freaking hard. Like that is one of the most difficult things to do. And that's where I had the most no's. An email didn't work, a phone call didn't work. I started with handwritten letters on a beautiful stationery, extolling the virtues of why they should see me for an appointment. You know, I was like begging to fly down to, Texas and see Neiman Marcus people and to Seattle to go to Nordstrom. And I couldn't even get an appointment, even though I was offering to ship all the stuff down, which would cost thousands of dollars, and fly down with an assistant. And this was like a $5,000 expense, and I couldn't even get the appointment initially. So it's tough. Like, I mean, but no can't mean no, because if no meant no, like I don't think anyone in fashion would be in business. Like we all get tons of no's, right?
Yeah, it's any entrepreneur, like anyone seeking money, anyone trying to start their new business or trying to reinvent it. It's like you're first going to get no's. So it's nice to remember. I love that no, not yet. Vic and I are very into that response and changing your way of perceiving how you can make it work, right? Like if you really believe in your idea.
I mean, and also truly, like, what's your hook? Like, so, I mean, the best, you know, a lot of people may not know this, but in footwear, over $200, which is, you know, getting into your better price points, and 300 and up, no one in North America sells more than Nordstrom. So they were originally a shoe company back 100 something years ago, and their shoe departments are powerhouses, and they go through volume like crazy. So sort of in my world, it's like the ultimate place to be. And I remember calling them and becoming like, I had like a friendship with like a buyer who never bought anything at the time. And now we do a wonderful business with them that's growing, you know, in Canada and across the US. But I remember like just having a chit chat with whoever it was, and they're like, Ron, you have to understand, like they were educating me. They go, I have 1,000 people who want to see me. Our trade show, our market, when they go buying, was 3 days long. They're like, how do I fit everyone in? Why should I see you? What's better? What's unique? What's different? What's innovative? What are you doing that no one else is doing? Right? And so you have to ask yourself that question. So for me, I was like, hey, I invented the world's first all-day heel. You need to see this thing. I have the trademark, the registration. You can't get it anywhere else. And this thing is just killer. And like, you know, you better cancel someone else's appointment because you probably need to see me.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
ironically, the all-day heels are like this much of our business now, right? That's where it started. But like people aren't buying heels right now. So it's all about luxe casuals and sneakers and slippers.
I feel like when you're really starting out, you, regardless of if it's a product or a service, it's about that hook, like your unique value proposition, really like to hone in on that, clarify what that is. And then you can do all the other stuff after, but you're right. It really is important for that starting point in your early years.
And by the way, that was the same thing with investors too. Like if you're trying to get any audience, like I've had people come to me, I'm like, well, I'm pretty busy too. You know, I still work 6 days a week. I'm going all the time. So why am I canceling something else or making room? Like what? Well, I think what I have is really good. I'm like, okay, that's not good enough. No, everyone thinks what they have is really good. So, you know, you got to sort of toughen up, get a thicker skin, and tell me why what you have is better or more unique or different than anyone else.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that tough love sometimes. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a deep question before we wrap up. And if anyone has any further questions, please pop them into the chat so that we don't get cut off. But Ron, what does like success mean to you? Like, how do you define success?
Interesting question. So I very recently had a friend who's a pretty successful guy on his own say to me, you need to stop and appreciate what you've built and what you're doing. Because I was having a bad day and a bad week because of what's going on in the world, because of everything that's happening and how difficult it is. And he said, you sound like an anorexic person looking in the mirror saying, I need to lose weight. And I was like, what? And he's like, you're doing fantastic over here. That is going great. This is doing phenomenal. He's like, you got to look and celebrate those successes along the way. And it's hard to do that. I think it's an entrepreneurial thing. No matter what happens, like if I have an all-time record sales season or day or month or year, I'm like, I kind of forget to stop and celebrate it. I go, okay, well, what's the next one going to be? How are we going to go to the next level? Like I just instantly go, oh, we just did this. Wow. Okay, high five. Okay, how are we going to do this? So that's how my brain is programmed. So I have to sort of turn that off every so often. But to come back to your question, it comes from sport. I used to be a competitive figure skater, and a lot of people don't know that. But and when I went to the Pan Am Games once, many years ago, I remember the sports psychologists and the leading coaches say something to me, and it's what still resonates to me today. And this comes from sport. And that's it doesn't matter what you're doing, and it could be sport, it could be business. Is if you make a plan and you deliver on that plan. So for me, it was a performance skating. It could be a tennis match. If you played a great game of tennis, it could be, again, designing a collection or presenting the collection. If I presented my collection that I'm so proud of, and I presented it properly, and the models did it properly, and everything was proper and great, I was like, that was a 10, and I still didn't get a buyer to pick it up at a store in the US, or I still didn't have success on a television network, you have to at some point, and for me, I go, you know what, that was a success. The buyer wasn't there, but I delivered it successfully, how I envisioned it, and I actually stop and celebrate that, and I don't beat myself up, because I say to myself, if you've delivered it how you had planned it, then that's all you can do. then you have to wait and see if there's a consumer. Then you have to wait and see if there's a response. So to me, a success is having the vision, putting it together, and delivering it as you envisioned. And then you see what happens. The market will tell you, and the world will tell you how you score, right? If it's in sport, are you getting a medal and are you on the podium? And if it's in business, are you getting orders and are you growing? But I do sit back and go, that is a freaking awesome collection. I am proud of you, Ron, and you've delivered it and you envisioned it, and that's what it is. Well, now we'll see what happens with the consumer. But I do take that as a first step in success.
And it's probably taken you a while to get there, right? Like you probably weren't so, in that mindset at the beginning, right? Like you just wanted to keep going.
And it's so interesting because when you're in fashion, so you're always working on a year ahead, right? So I am working on fall, winter of 2021 right now. So what are the heels I'm going to have? What are the boots I'm going to have? What are the materials? What's the textures? What's the color palette? Okay, like what is happening? Is it still soft gold in that champagne color, or are we going to move to a different metallic? Right? Like what are all those influences? What's the inspiration? What's the collection? So it's so far in advance, and then the samples from that new collection won't be ready to unveil to the marketplace for till February. And the buyers will buy them, see them in February, write their orders, and we'll produce them in March, April, May, June, and then ship them, and then they'll be in stores for fall, for August or so of 2021. So it for me over the years now, I'm getting older. It's been kind of like a bit of a when you watch a television show and you're dying to see what's going to happen at the end of the series, you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And you stay up really late and you watch too many episodes and you're like, oh my God, it's 2 a.m. Why am I still watching Game of Thrones or whatever the heck you're watching? Or The Crown or whatever. You're just anxious to see the results. I'm actually anxious to see the results because many, many times I think this here is a 10. Like, wow, did this come together? This is going to be our top seller. And this, I think it's okay, but I'm going to show it anyway, and we'll see what the reaction is from buyers and consumers. And often that becomes the 7 and that becomes the 10. And I'm just fascinated by that. Like, how did that happen? And how did this, which I thought maybe was mediocre, become the top seller? And at this point, I love to analyze. I love to see the reaction. I love to try and connect the dots going, why was that so freaking successful? I mean, I love that it was successful, but why? And then you learn from that and build that into the next collection.
You just inspired me to write this on my little sticky, stop and celebrate. I'm literally putting it on my wall because it's so true. Like, let's all just stop.
We don't do it enough. We don't do it enough. And I love what you're saying, Ron, because I think one thing that resonates very true for a lot of our members in our community is they get paralyzed in the planning and like trying to make everything so perfect in every detail, which is important, but often it's just getting it out into the world and seeing what happens and taking a step back and be like, okay, this is what people like, they don't like, and molding it as you go and changing it the next time around.
Manolo Blahnik once said to me, the collection is never finished. And I was like, oh my God, that's so right. And he's like, but there is a point where you have to just say, I'm done. Like, it's a deadline, really. Like, it's like, if I don't say I'm done, the factories won't make the samples in time and I won't be able to show it in New York Fashion Week. Like, so you have to have a deadline, right? A cutoff. But every time you revise a pattern, revise a sample, revise something, like, you know what, maybe I should just burnish this a little bit more. That might look better with the toe shape a little bit tweaked. Maybe I should change the stitching. And you keep evolving it, and it does get better every time in most cases, but it's never done. Like, you always feel like, oh, maybe I should have changed that last thing. But you just have to, there's a line where you just got to go, okay, I'm done. And that's really hard to do, by the way, because you always think like, I can make it a little bit better. But at some point you have to be done because of deadlines, and then you move on to the next collection.
Yeah. One last question before Vic and I wrap up on this, such an interesting talk with you, Ron. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? I feel like you probably have some interesting ideas up your sleeve or something happening in your world. What's going to happen in the future for you?
Well, what I've learned is because I like to say we make from jeans to tuxedos. So I do luxe casuals and I do red carpet, and I dress the people for the red carpets, the Golden Globes and the Emmys and the Oscars. And then I also, that's not your core business. My core business is, a woman who wants to look chic and sophisticated, whether she's casual or whether she's dressy, and also be comfortable at the same time. And she's kind of not that person who has that giant brand logo all over her, whatever. because I feel she has a different confidence, that she doesn't need to have a giant logo showing up. And that's sort of a different type of consumer versus the one that has to have a giant logo in everyone's face. So for me, she's become very loyal, and she tells us in our stores, online, and any of our communication, like, I haven't bought another brand for a decade. I mean, Jeannie Becker stopped me the last time we did a show together, and she goes, Ron, 80% of my shoes are yours. She goes, the other 20% is something specific to match an outfit. She goes, the sneakers, the casuals, the boots, the heels, they're yours. That's what I gravitate to. That's what I wear. And I'm like, this is so awesome. So what I did, I have one in the background, but I moved into handbags just in the last year. And I'm looking at doing men's belts. I'm looking at other expanding categories. We are launching our very first luxury slipper collection based on my top selling ultralight butter soft sneakers. And they literally hit the stores and the web and everything in about 2 weeks. And I mean, the response from the buyers across North America has been like mind-boggling. So for us, it was just shifting gears really quick and doing this all during COVID. But I was able to work with leathers that I'm familiar with, like deerskin, which is really soft, or quilted Napa. Like, imagine a little slipper that looks like a Chanel purse on your feet. Like, I mean, that's what I'm doing with tons of padding, and people want that. So that all comes out shortly. So I'm pivoting to, or adding in other categories that are easy add-ons or sort of sisters or cousins to what I'm doing. I'm not getting into clothing, but I am getting into slippers and handbags and maybe belts.
So exciting. Okay, well, we'll have to go check those out. I was like, deerskin, that sounds lovely, soft and cozy, which is what we all need right now. All right, Ron, thank you so much. If no one else has any questions, we're going to wrap it up. We want to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today. What's coming up next for us? We have Avi Grondin in with us. He's an expert in building service-based businesses and scaling them. So he's going to teach us how to build proper lead generation for service-based entrepreneurs. And then, of course, on Wednesday, November 25th at 5 o'clock, we have our monthly networking happy hour. We're going to be doing it on Hopin, so you'll be able to connect with 15 to 20 other entrepreneurs. Friendly reminder, if you want access to everything we do and more, we have a membership program. It's very affordable right now, only $299 a year. Prices will be going way up in 2021, as the value is over $1,000. So we would love to welcome you as a member if that's something that interests you.
And as Ron said, don't forget to stop and celebrate. You should put that somewhere, Ron, on like inside of a shoe or something. That's just
stop and celebrate. Well, thank you guys for hosting me and having me here today and letting me share my story and taking a moment to stop and celebrate, because this is one of those moments. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate having you. And to everyone else, have a wonderful, what day is it? Thursday. Have a wonderful Thursday.
Stay healthy. Stay
healthy, exactly. All right. We needed Sam to come back on to stop us, but it's okay. We'll just leave this. Thanks, Ron.